A Pocket in Time, the story of Flight 109. I work for the FAA. Been doing it for a long time. I guess you can call me a senior investigator. I've been a part of so many crashes I don't want to remember. This story is a story that forced me to retire. I was well over the time to go, but I just loved my job. Not the bad part, but I really didn't love it this much. I got a call around 2 a.m. from Richmond National Airport. They needed me to come down right away. I asked what the nature of the call was, and they said they'd tell me when I got there. Usually that's a sign of something bad or something to do with national security. I got there in about 45 minutes, and I was taken to an older part of the airport. An old-type hangar was opened, and there it was, in Eastern Airlines Douglas DC-3, shiny and new. I asked why I was there and got a concerning look. I was told the time-old story of, well, what we're about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but here it goes. I told them I've seen a lot and nothing would shock me. They said, the plane landed a few hours ago. And what, I said. It landed without any passengers. And crew. What? Is this some kind of gag? It's a joke, right? At that moment, a military officer came from the hangar and said, look, this plane landed by itself and you're here to find out why. I was dumbstruck. Planes don't land themselves, and especially not a DC-3. This was the last year that they were built, 1950. These planes are still in service all around the world. I asked to inspect the plane and was granted unfettered access. The door was opened and I got on board. The plane was so new you could still smell the new upholstery smell to it. I checked everywhere. The plane had a half tank of fuel, and there were no signs of anyone. No personal effects, no luggage, nothing. The plane's tail number was F-BFGD. Of course, I asked if they ran the number, and they said they did, but it didn't make sense. That plane went missing on July 29th, 1960, on a trip from New York City to what was then called Byrd Airport. No trace of it was ever found. And now, it showed up to its destination, 63 years later. But how was that possible? It was late, and the military had set up a makeshift HQ in the hangar adjacent to the aircraft while we conducted our investigation. At about 4 a.m., we received a call from one of the 4 soldiers that were guarding the plane. He advised that the cockpit light had been going on and on by itself, and no one was on board. We rushed out and boarded the plane, and the light was indeed on. I turned it off and exited. There was a weird sense about this aircraft that I didn't want a part of. I wanted it solved, and I wanted to go home. As I exited the plane, the engine started. I was startled because there was no one, and I mean no one on this plane but me. I ran to the cockpit, my heart dropped. Instruments were moving on their own, the radio was chattering with static, and the plane started to move. I ran out as fast as I could and back to the hangar. By this time, everyone was on the tarmac looking at the plane and asking who was piloting it. I said, no one. The boarding door slammed shut and couldn't be opened by the 2 soldiers that were trying to. The DC then turned and started to taxi the runway. I could hear the control tower over the makeshift radio saying that the plane was not clear to take off and it was unauthorized. That didn't matter. The old shiny bird started to gain speed as the engines revved up. Soon it was down the runway and gone from our view. The officer in charge had a look of terror on his face. He turned and said, "You will not, I repeat, not speak of what you saw here today." I didn't mind because if I had told anyone about the story, they probably would think I lost my marbles. I don't think I slept for 3 days after this happened. A few months later, I was listening to the news while driving home from work, and I had to pull over. The announcer said that an old plane had been found in the Virginia mountains. An old DC-3. It was Flight 109. Hikers on a remote part of the trail discovered the plane, torn to pieces, with scattered skeletal remains in and around the aircraft. The 2 pilots' remains were found along with the crew and passengers. No one had survived. About an hour later, I received a phone call from the same commanding officer that was there that night on the DC tarmac when it arrived. He had asked me if I'd heard the news, and I replied yes. He said, "Well, I don't know what happened that July morning, but it's the same plane that we saw that night. The tail number matches, F-BFGD, Flight 109, Eastern Airlines, New York City to Richmond. I think she wanted to be found, and she was. Was it a stroke of luck, or was it fate? Did we see her ghost, or was this some sort of pocket in time? I put in for retirement shortly after. Every time I see a plane in the sky, I get a tense feeling. I hope I never see a DC-3 again."